Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Who We Are podcast. What does it take to reimagine the way we live, challenge the status quo, and bring ideas to life that others said would never work? Sir James Dyson has spent his entire career proving that the impossible is often just the beginning. In this rare and intimate conversation, I had the privilege of sitting down with one of the greatest inventors of our time to uncover the driving force behind his relentless pursuit of innovation. He shares why he believes that naivety, asking the right why questions, is often more powerful than expertise. How he navigates uncertainty and the bold decisions that have shaped Dyson into the revolutionary company it is today. We also talk about resilience, the moments of self-doubt he's faced, and the single piece of advice he would give to the next generation of problem solvers. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a creative thinker, or simply someone who wants to challenge the way things are, this conversation will leave you inspired to trust your instincts and push forward, even when the world tells us otherwise. Let's dive in. James, it's an absolute privilege and honor to have you on my show, Who We Are. Thank you for taking the time amidst your packed schedule. Dyson is such a household name globally, and what really stands out is your relentless pursuit of innovation and problem solving that has really shaped not just products, but also industries. I'd love to dive deeper today into your leadership journey, your vision for Dyson, and also the impact that you're having here in Singapore, from engineering excellence to the James Dyson Award, inspiring young innovators worldwide. I have a lot of questions for you, but I wanted to also start with your leadership and personal journey. You've often been described as a trailblazer in innovation. I'm curious to know, James, what principles guide your leadership and how do you nurture a culture of innovation across Dyson globally?
Well, I really believe in employing young people. And indeed, I've done quite a lot to encourage education in universities, technical education, and encouraging children to go into engineering and design as a career. And we now even have our own university at Dyson, where we actually pay the students. And we provide the education free and pay the students.
Amazing.
And they come out of that course and work for Dyson. And they're about 5 years ahead of students coming from normal universities. So it's proved to be very successful. So to really answer the question, we're trying to do things differently. And it's much easier if you have very young people, graduates or students. They're much more able to do something differently and in a different way. That's not to say, I mean, we had an engineer who was 80. He wouldn't stop working for us. So it's not, but what I mean is that we have a culture around the campus of young people. I mean, if you come to our campus, it looks like it's a load of students. It looks like a university. The whole thing looks like a university. But of course, it's very serious and we're developing long-term technology. We're trying to do things very quickly, which isn't really what happens on the whole at universities. So it's a very serious operation, but at the same time, it's young and we're trying to do things differently.
But I'm so curious, James, you talk a lot about young people and your emphasis on young people. If I could double click on that, what is it about young people? Is it because they are not set in their ways yet and therefore are more open to exploring different things, or they don't have a preconceived notion on how the world works yet? What is it about young people that you're particularly that you find particularly important to have in your organization?
Well, you've more or less said it there.
Yeah.
I could add one other thing, which is naivety.
Right.
I'm a great believer in naivety, the naive question, the questioning of things. Not necessarily, I hate the word expert because expert implies you know it all. And the last thing we know is what tomorrow is going to be like.
Yeah.
So if you want to change things, and actually in this fast changing world, probably experts are not redundant, but if you want to change things, you're better off with people who have no experience, have nothing to draw on to work out how to make a decision, but make a decision based on the facts placed in front of them from a common sense and intelligent point of view. So I just find them easier to work with because of that.
Yeah, no, that's really, really insightful.
And
And you,
I was very lucky because when I was at university, I was asked to design a high-speed landing craft
yeah,
for the military and construction industries. I'd never designed a boat before, and I knew nothing about the material I was designing it in. But I was given this responsibility by the chairman of an engineering company who wanted to start a new division. And that's what I did. I went off and started a new division, knowing nothing about it, being naive and having no preconceptions, no experience. And it can work. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work, but it can work.
No, I mean, clearly what you've experienced and also your culture in Dyson has really proved that it works. You talked also earlier about today's fast changing world. With the world evolving so quickly today, James, how has your approach to leadership evolved and changed over the years? And what do you believe is the most important quality for a leader to have today?
I think it depends what you're doing. If you're a military commander, that's one form of leadership. If you're doing what I'm doing, which is trying to design and engineer new technology and new products, it's a different type of leadership. We need lots of engineers, lots of bright scientists inventing things, coming up with solutions all the time. That's the most important thing. So encouraging that, encouraging the naive approach, encouraging the different approach, being unafraid to take a different path and to constantly change it because situations change. So I call it, in a way, managing change, managing revolution all the time. So giving leadership on that direction. And in the end, it has to be a single purpose. So you have to decide on the single purpose. So you have to hear what people are saying, hear what people are doing, and then guide them and us in a particular direction, for better or for worse. Sometimes what you do is wrong, and you have to accept that. But for me, it's better to do the wrong thing quickly than the right thing too late, because you can always adjust and change. So leadership is giving that direction. And also with the organization, traditional organization doesn't work nowadays, certainly not in our field. So you've got to find ways of using a much smaller organization and being much more light-footed and being able to change rapidly with changing circumstances and disasters. And there are, disasters happen: COVID, earthquakes, fires in factories, all sorts of things happen. And you've got to adapt and quickly change and overcome problems. So fearlessly dealing with challenges and going in new directions and bringing people with you and following the directions that people in the business have ideas for is important as well. So encouraging people to come up with different ideas and not be afraid to suggest things is important. Creating that lack of fear and encouraging new things and not being cynical about new ideas, however strange they are.
Is there an example of how you put that into practice, James? Because I think in theory, that sounds exactly like what all great leaders need to do. However, I think when it comes to practice, sometimes it's a lot harder for leaders to be able to model this.
I'll give an example. It's a very simple and graphic example. When we launched the vacuum cleaner, it had a clear bin and you saw all the filthy dust that was coming up off the floor. And we as engineers rather like this. It's a sort of morbid fascination with this filth that was in your carpet or on your floor. But nobody else did. So the retailers that we approached to sell the vacuum cleaner for us said, "You'll never sell it like that. In fact, we don't even want that in our shops." We did a little bit of market research, and the market research confirmed exactly what the retailers were saying. But we as engineers decided that they were wrong, just instinctively.
Wow.
So we had to ignore the focus groups, ignore market research, ignore what our customers were saying, and go with something that we fundamentally believed with, against all the advice, all the experts, all the experience. So, and curiously, our competitors laughed at it when they saw it, but they very quickly all copied it. So all I'm saying is that so often what you can't ask focus groups or market research to tell you anything. You can look at it and listen to it, and of course listen to what your customers say, but your customers can't tell you what they're going to want in the future. That's not their job. So it's not easy,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of what Henry Ford said. He said, if I had asked my customers what they had wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse.
Yeah,
And what
exactly.
you talked about, it's so similar to also what Steve Jobs really believed in as well during his time with Apple, coming up with some of the best inventions. James, I also wanted to ask you, were there any pivotal figures or mentors who significantly influenced you and your approach to innovation and leadership?
Yes, but I get this goes back to the 1960s when I was at university, a long time ago. There were two things going on. One was in cars. Cars, you can see them. They're very graphic. They're there.
Yeah.
And Andre Citroën at the time was doing, well, he was dead, but the company and his history of revolutionizing cars was interesting, and it wasn't much appreciated by the public. But in the Citroën DS, he put in hydraulic steering, hydraulic suspension, and hydraulic brakes as a system. And only today, 60 or 70 years later, have the big marques copied this. So he was way, way ahead of his time. But it was going on in the 60s, and there was Concorde going on, and airplane Concorde, and the Mini came out when I was in my teens, and a great friend of Isagonis was the chairman that asked me to design a high-speed landing craft while I was still at university. And in a way, he was my mentor because we were both architects who had become engineers. I was an architect. He had been an architect who had become an engineer, but he was 30 years older than I was, and he was chairman of a big very successful engineering company. So he taught me to follow my instincts, ignore market research, and we both had a love of engineering and wanted to do new technology that made a product work better, in spite of what it might look like, and in spite of how unusual it might appear to people. And I learned to very quickly how to manufacture things, how to source the components, how to build a product, how to sell it across the world. So he was really my first mentor.
And I love that because it's almost like he was the one that really pushed you to follow your instincts. Don't just rely on data, research, or customer feedback.
Exactly. I always say that market research and focus groups are trusted by politicians, which is why you should avoid them.
But how do you reconcile, following, just going 100% by your gut and instinct against sometimes what data is telling you? How do you reconcile that?
You can't. You just have to take that risk, and you won't be right all of the time.
Yeah.
But you'll be right some of the time.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to make progress. It's not entirely following your gut, because your gut is made up of inputs.
Yep.
So it's not sort of, I'm going to do that. It's that I've observed this. I mean, the current products have this fault. I think people will like what I'm going to do because X, Y, and Z. Even though in focus groups, it might not work very well.
Yeah.
For example, our fans. Our fans with no blades.
Yes.
Before we launched that, we did a bit of research, and everybody thought it was a loudspeaker of some sort, not a fan. And I couldn't get anyone interested until I got up very early one morning, went out into New Jersey to a business breakfast, which is quite a popular thing in America, business breakfast TV programs. And the interview wasn't going very well. So the fan was on the desk in front of me. So I put my head through it to sort of emphasize that it had no blades.
Yeah.
It was like a bladeless fan.
Yeah.
And the interviewers then wanted to put their heads through it. And one was a girl who sort of did have hair like that.
Wow.
And then that caught everybody's imagination. This is a fan, which doesn't have those awful blades, those dangerous blades. So, sometimes you get lucky. I got lucky at that time. But the thing is, you've just got to be unafraid to launch something that people might not immediately understand.
Yeah. James, have you ever gone through any period where you have doubts, uncertainty, and what encourages you and pushes you on in this journey?
Well, I used to run. I still run. But I used to race the mile and a bit longer. And what I learned was that there's a point in the race, usually 3/4 of the way through, when you feel really exhausted and you wish it was all over. And what you have to remember is that other people are feeling the same. So it's when you feel most tired is when you should accelerate, because that's the way to get through the difficulty and make a success. And we so often find that with research and development. There's a point where we've tried everything and we can't make it work. And you've just got to say, right, we're going to go on. We're going to really try hard now, double down and solve this problem. And sometimes the success is literally just around the corner, almost.
Yeah.
So it's you have to go through what I call the pain barrier. People give up usually at the pain barrier point. So many of my friends were telling me that what I was doing was stupid, and I'd never succeed, and I could never take on the big multinationals at what I was doing. Even after I'd made the invention work, they said you can't possibly take on those people. So I was slightly reckless and ignored them, ignored advice.
But I am sure, James, in your journey, there have been times too where you've had to give up, where you've had to persevere, and like you said, push through the pain barrier. And I want to ask you, how do you know when it's time to do which? Because I think some of the most important decisions that we have to make in life, in business or in life, is to know when to pivot, when to pull the plug, when to persevere, or when to pause.
Well, with if you're developing a product which you put into the market, you don't give up until it fails, but hopefully it succeeds. But there are some projects that depend on other people, and we've had two quite big projects that depended on other people, and events conspired against that proposition. So one was we did something to collect diesel exhaust pollution. And many years ago, back in the 80s and 90s, a diesel vehicle used to belch out a cloud of black smoke. The oil companies then made diesel particulate much finer, so it was harder to see, but the danger was still there of breathing in that particulate. So we improved our development so that we could collect this. Wow. But then government started saying that diesel was green and clean.
Yes.
And so the transport companies had no incentive whatsoever to fit something that would trap and contain diesel particulate. So at that point, we had to give up because we had no customers. Another one was our electric car, which we put a lot of money into and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of...
Which I see the model being displayed in one of your Singapore offices.
Exactly, that one. Now, when I started that in 2014 and gave up in 2019, the reason I gave up was that Dieselgate happened. This whole exposure of the fact that diesel particulate was much worse than everybody thought, and that car companies were concealing through a sort of fake test that their vehicles were clean when they weren't. The PR was so bad for the major companies producing diesel vehicles that they were going to go electric. So this meant that not only did I then have a lot of competition, because when I started, there was just Tesla and us doing it. Suddenly, everybody was going to come into it. Now, that didn't worry me. But what was worrying me was that they could afford to do battery cars at a loss, because car companies are reckoned upon their overall emissions. So if you have a clean electric car, you can have big gas guzzlers this end, because you've got that offsetting and lowering your balance. And Tesla, of course, sells its offsets to other car companies and gets money for it. So what I was up against was big companies doing electric vehicles at a loss, and that they are making them at a loss, considerable loss. So I couldn't compete with that. That was, certainly not in the short term, maybe the long term, but not the short term. And, I'm a small company, a relatively small company compared with the car companies. So circumstances conspired against us. In the market, external circumstances. So at that point, we gave up.
James, were there times where perhaps ego or pride got in the way, where you felt like, oh, I can't give up because there's too much to lose, or, I'm basically, just allowing the ego and pride to speak versus making the best decision for the company?
I'll give an example, actually. It was just before I started manufacturing.
Yeah.
We had a very long lawsuit in the United States with someone who had copied us. And this was draining me because lawsuits there are very expensive. So it took a lot of time, a lot of reading of legal documents, going to depositions. In those days, a deposition is where you're cross-examined by the opposing attorneys for 2 or 3 weeks on end, every day, 8 hours a day. So but it was draining me of everything I had, and I wanted to set up my own manufacturing company. So I was very, very tempted to give up. And actually, my wife said, "You're not to give up. You're to carry on."
Wow.
And success was indeed around the corner. We won, and unexpectedly. And so that's an example of wanting perhaps to take a pragmatic decision, that it was better to give it up and get on with life. And my wife said, "No, you mustn't." And we got our reward for that, for our determination and persistence.
Amazing.
You know, you make decisions. I always think that probably 50% of the decisions you make are wrong. And it doesn't matter. Mistakes don't matter. What matters is how you pick yourself up and get yourself out of the mess. You know, you're going to get into problems. You're going to have terrible, huge barriers put in front of you. But you've just got to work your way through them.
That's great perspective. James, before I wrap up the conversation, I also want to ask you a final question on the James Dyson Award. That has really inspired countless of young innovators. And Singapore has also seen some incredible winners of the James Dyson Award. What excites you most about the ideas and innovations emerging from young talents? And maybe do you have any word of advice for aspiring engineers or designers who are keen to also pursue this path and career?
Well, no, thank you for raising that. I mean, what's really encouraging about the award, which we now run in, I think, 32 countries around the world, is that we don't tell people what to design, we ask them to solve a problem. Don't say what the problem is. We just say solve a problem. And they solve it in 2 areas. In the medical area, often particularly for old people or people with some congenital difficulty, illness. And on the other hand, solving environmental problems. Just those 2. When we first started it 25 years ago, some people used to do surfboards and sort of exciting leisure things. They don't now. No, they're very serious. They want to solve problems. And our 2 Singapore winners won this year for the weather balloon that can guide itself down, which is brilliant. And one a couple of years ago for home testing of glaucoma. One medical, one environmental, were brilliant winners. And I think the talent that's coming out of Singapore universities is wonderful. And the desire to invent and create technology and design well is alive and well in Singapore, which bodes well for Singapore. But globally, I think that this desire of young engineers and young scientists, and also I want to encourage people to be engineers and scientists and not bankers and other things, but because you can change the world. And instead of talking about problems, you can solve them. And we should really charge young engineers, young scientists with solving the problems. We don't need to make our lives worse or more restrictive because of environmental issues, because science and engineering and companies will solve those problems. I'll give an example, actually. Our vacuum cleaners use 200 watts now. 10 years ago, they were 2,000 watts, mains vacuum cleaners. And we brought out our stick vacuum cleaners at 200 watts, which are more effective than the 2,000 watts and much easier and more enjoyable to use.
Amazing.
Our hand dryers use 1/10 of the electricity of previous hand dryers. And of course, our vacuum cleaners are getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So it's an example of how technology will solve sustainability issues. We don't need to restrict people. Just give encouragement to young people and let them loose to solve.
Let them loose,
So at the ripe old age of 77, I have huge faith in our young people to solve the problems of the many environmental and medical and other problems that exist today. And what really worried me was students having to pay for their education, having to pay their living expenses, which is a big issue in the United States and Britain. So we started our own university, and we pay the students, and we pay for their education, and they work for me, and they do their studies at the same time. And the interesting thing, because they're working every day with scientists and engineers, our scientists and engineers, they're gaining so much more experience and have a stronger desire to do the academic side because they can apply it on the practical side every day.
They see the correlation, yeah.
They see, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we find that our engineers, when they qualify, are a good 5 years ahead of engineers coming from a normal university. So it wasn't my idea. It was suggested to me by Joe Johnson, and it was his idea, and he brought a bill through Parliament to allow us. So we're the first new university in Britain for 40 years.
Amazing. James, my final question is, if you could have a billboard down the streets in every city in the world, what would your billboard say?
My billboard would say, stop talking about issues and problems, solve them. Entrust people, particularly young people, to solve them. And if more people wanted to be engineers and scientists, I believe the world would be a better place.
It's amazing. Well, thank you so much, James, for your time, for sharing your wisdom. I would love to, dive deeper into so much more, but I respect your time and hope to catch you the next time you're in Singapore.
That would be very good. Let's meet up. And
Yes.
I'd love to hear about your business.